The solicitor's letter arrived on a Tuesday, sealed in black wax and smelling of old paper and estate dust. Evangeline read it 3 times in her cramped London flat, each word more impossible than the last. You are hereby notified that Blackthorn Manor, situated in the Yorkshire moors, has been willed to you in its entirety by your great-aunt, Lady Margaret Ashford, deceased these past 6 months. As you are the last surviving blood relation, and the estate has remained entailed to the Ashford name for 7 centuries, the property and all its contents now belong to you. Immediate occupancy is advised, as the manor requires a resident keeper. Evangeline had never met Lady Margaret. Her mother, Margaret's estranged niece, had died when Evangeline was 6, and her father had raised her in deliberate ignorance of the family's darker histories. "Let sleeping ghosts lie," he'd always said, with a finality that discouraged questions. Now, as her carriage wound through November fog toward the sprawling Gothic silhouette of Blackthorn Manor, Evangeline wondered what ghosts she was about to wake. The manor erupted from the moors like a wound, 3 stories of blackstone and corroded lead, with towers that seemed to claw at the low sky. Ivy consumed the eastern wing in a writhing mass of skeletal tendrils. Windows stared like empty eyes, some boarded, others reflecting nothing but fog and moonlight. The circular drive was choked with weeds. No one had tended this place in decades. The head groundskeeper, an ancient man named Hartwell, met her at the entrance with a lantern that barely penetrated the gathering dark. "The manor's been sealed since Lady Margaret took ill, miss," he said, his voice tight. "No one enters after dusk. Those are the terms of her will." "Terms?" Evangeline's trunk was being unloaded from the carriage. "Mr. Hartwell, it's my home now. I'll enter as I please." His weathered face crumpled. He didn't argue, but as he led her through the entrance hall, a cathedral of shadow and marble where her footsteps echoed like accusations, she felt the weight of his disapproval like hands on her shoulders. The manor's interior was a tomb of velvet and mahogany. Sheets covered the furniture like sleeping ghosts. Dust hung thick enough to taste. Hartwell lit candles along the corridor with shaking fingers, and Evangeline noticed his hand never quite steadied. He showed her to a suite on the 2nd floor, a bedroom adjoining a sitting room, both decorated in faded crimson and gold. "Ring if you need anything, miss," he said, and fled before she could ask what he feared. Evangeline unpacked methodically, trying to settle her nerves. The manor was simply old, neglected. There was nothing sinister in its silence, only abandonment. Yet as the candles burned lower, she found herself drawn to the long corridor, past the library, toward the eastern wing where dust motes danced in the darkness. She shouldn't have gone there. Some instinct, old, animal, ancestral, screamed at her to turn back. But Evangeline had always been curious. A single door stood ajar at the corridor's end. Beyond it, a gallery, moonlight streaming through uncovered windows. And there, dominating the far wall, hung an enormous portrait in a tarnished gilt frame. The man in the painting wore the formal dress of another century, perhaps the 1600s, all midnight velvet and silver thread. His face was beautiful in a terrible way, carved from marble and shadow, with eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His expression held infinite sorrow, as though he'd been painted in the moment his soul broke. Evangeline stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The portrait was technically masterful, every brushstroke deliberate, every shadow placed with obsessive care. But it was the eyes that held her. They seemed to watch her. The candlelight flickered. She blinked. The eyes, had they moved? They'd been fixed on something beyond the canvas before. Now they were fixed on her. Evangeline's breath caught. A draft, she rationalized. Only a draft moving the candle flame. The portrait wouldn't. The clock in the hall below began to chime midnight. With each toll, the painted man's face became more vivid, The shadows beneath his eyes deepened. His lips, bloodless and austere, seemed to soften, as if on the verge of speech. On the final chime, Evangeline gasped. For just an instant she could have sworn she saw his chest rise in a breath. When the clock fell silent, the portrait was motionless again. But something had changed. A presence had flooded the gallery, not threatening, exactly, but aware. The air thickened with something ancient and desperate, like the last breath of a dying man. The scent rolled over her, aged leather, cold stone, and something darker. Something that smelled like old blood washed in moonlight. A voice, low and fractured with centuries, emerged from the portrait itself. At last. Evangeline stumbled backward, her candle nearly dropping from her trembling fingers. The painting remained inert, but the presence in the room crystallized into something almost physical, a weight, a hunger, a need so profound it seemed to shatter the silence like glass. "You carry her blood," the voice continued, emanating from everywhere and nowhere. "After all these years, after all this darkness, you finally come home." The candle guttered. In the moment before darkness consumed the gallery, Evangeline saw the portrait one final time. The painted man's eyes were no longer fixed on her. His lips were curved in a smile that held 7 centuries of longing. Evangeline didn't sleep that night. She'd fled the gallery, her candle nearly extinguished, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape her chest. Back in her suite, she'd locked the door. A useless gesture, she knew, if what she'd heard was real. If a voice trapped in a portrait for centuries could speak her name, a lock would hardly stop it. She'd sat by the window until dawn, watching the moors shift from black to gray, waiting for sanity to return with the light. It didn't. By late afternoon, as fog rolled across the estate in thick, suffocating waves, Evangeline found herself drawn back toward the eastern wing. She'd changed into a fresh gown, emerald silk, inappropriate for the chill, and told herself she was conducting a practical inventory. The manor was hers now. She needed to understand its layout, its contents, its secrets. The lie felt thin as tissue paper. The gallery was empty in daylight. Dust motes spiraled through pale afternoon light, and the portrait of the dark-eyed man hung in motionless silence. In the harsh gray illumination, Evangeline could see details she'd missed the night before. A silver ring on his right hand, inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize. A tear, actual paint layered over paint, frozen on his left cheek. And beneath the velvet of his coat, a stain that might have been wine, or might have been something far older. She raised her hand toward the canvas, not quite daring to touch. "Don't," a voice said behind her. Evangeline spun, her heart leaping into her throat. A woman stood in the gallery doorway, elderly, dressed in black wool, with iron-gray hair pinned severely back. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Evangeline's voice cracked slightly. "You startled me." "The groundskeeper's wife," the woman confirmed, stepping into the gallery with visible reluctance. "I've come to warn you, miss. Hartwell's too frightened to speak plainly, but I've served this house for 40 years. Since before Lady Margaret took ill." "Warn me about what?" Mrs. Hartwell's eyes, a pale, unsettling blue, fixed on the portrait. Her jaw tightened. "That one," she said quietly. "Don't look at it after dark. Don't listen if it speaks. Don't, under any circumstances, touch the frame." "It's a painting," Evangeline said, hearing the weakness in her own voice. "A very old painting." "It's a prison," Mrs. Hartwell corrected. "Has been for nigh on 300 years. Your great-aunt understood that. She kept the gallery sealed, the portrait covered, the eastern wing locked. But you've come now, and he knows it. He always knows when Ashford blood enters this house." "Who is he?" Mrs. Hartwell turned away, but not before Evangeline saw the fear flicker across her weathered face. That's not for me to tell, miss. Read the journals in the library. Lady Margaret left them for you. She said, when the last of the blood came to Blackthorn, you'd have the right to know the truth. Before Evangeline could press further, the old woman was gone, her footsteps echoing down the corridor in rapid retreat. That night, Evangeline found the journals hidden behind a loose stone in the library's chimney breast, 11 leather-bound volumes, each marked with dates spanning more than 2 centuries. The earliest was dated 1723. She pulled them into the candlelight with trembling fingers and began to read. 9th of March, 1723. I confess my sins this night, if only to the blank pages of this journal, for I have not the courage to speak them aloud. He came to me in the forest beyond the eastern pasture. I was gathering herbs, foolish girl that I am, wandering alone after dusk. The wolves, if they were wolves, did not touch me. Instead, a man emerged from the darkness, and I knew him at once, though we had never met. He had the face of the portrait hanging in the gallery, but where the painting shows only sorrow, his living eyes held hunger. He said his name was Thaddeus Corvain, and that he had been waiting 300 years for an Ashford woman to walk alone into the dark. Evangeline's hands shook. She read faster, her eyes scanning the looping handwriting, watching the story unfold across decades and generations. 22nd of May, 1723. The fever comes and goes. Mother believes it consumption, but I know better. He visited me twice more in the forest. Each time his touch grew warmer, and the hunger in his eyes grew sharper. Yesterday, he took my wrist between his teeth. The pain was exquisite. When I woke, I bore no mark, but I could feel his presence like a second heartbeat beneath my skin. 1st of July, 1723. I understand now. We are bound through blood, and something older than blood. The physicians cannot explain why I do not sicken. Why, each time he touches me, I should die, for his very presence withers living things. The servants say the flowers die in the rooms where he walks. And yet I live. Mother whispers that I'm cursed. Perhaps I am. Perhaps this is my curse, to love something that destroys all it touches, and to be the single thing it cannot destroy. The entries continued through the centuries. Different handwriting, different names, but the same story repeated like a curse laid upon every woman born into the Ashford line. Each one had been drawn to him. Each one had discovered what he was. Each one had faced the impossible choice, mortality, or transformation, or the twilight existence of loving something that could never truly hold her without risking obliteration. The final entry was in Lady Margaret's hand, dated just before her death. 12th of October, 1820. I am the last. No children carry the Ashford name forward but through my brother's line, and Evangeline's mother, God rest her, broke the chain when she fled this house and married that ordinary man. I have spent my life keeping Thaddeus imprisoned in that portrait, the blood ritual renewed each year on the dark moon. It costs me more with each passing decade, my life for his captivity. It is a fair exchange, but the magic is weakening. The portrait shows him more clearly each year. I can feel him pressing against the boundaries I've maintained. When I am gone, they will crumble. And when they do, he will search for the blood that calls to him across the years. Evangeline, my great niece, whom I have never met. If you read this, you carry our blood and our legacy. He will not harm you, cannot harm you, for the old magic that binds you both makes you immune to his curse. But know this, he has waited 300 years. His hunger is ancient. His loneliness is absolute. And he loves you already, though you are yet a stranger. The choice, when it comes, will be yours alone. Evangeline set down the final journal as the clock struck midnight. Below, in the eastern wing, she heard it, the sound of a frame cracking, wood splitting under pressure that had been contained for too long. Then silence, a silence so complete it seemed to swallow the world. In that silence, she felt a presence move through the manor like smoke through a keyhole. It found her in the library, coiled around her like an embrace, and whispered her name, Evangeline, Evangeline, with such desperate tenderness that she wept without understanding why. The journals fell from her lap, and in the candlelight, her shadow on the wall seemed to move independently, reaching toward something she could not see. He materialized in the library like fog taking form. One moment, Evangeline sat alone among the journals, her candles burning low, her heart still trembling from that impossible whisper. The next, the air itself seemed to fracture. Shadows peeled away from the corners, gathering substance and intention, until a figure stood before the fireplace, motionless, watching her with eyes that held the weight of centuries. Thaddeus Corvain was exactly as the portrait had rendered him, and nothing like it at all. The painting had captured his beauty. Yes, the sharp architecture of his face, the devastating symmetry of his features. But it had missed the danger. The portrait showed sorrow. Reality showed something far more terrible. A predator so perfectly refined that his monstrosity was invisible beneath layers of elegance and grief. He wore clothes from no particular era, a shirt of black silk, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing skin so pale it seemed translucent in the firelight. His coat was velvet, midnight dark, with silver threading that caught the flames. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of deepest brown, threaded through with silver that might have been age or might have been something else entirely. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were black. Not dark brown, but genuinely black, as though his pupils had consumed his irises entirely. And within that blackness, she saw depth upon depth. Centuries of nights, endless hunger, love burning like a candle flame in the absolute dark. "You came," he said. His voice was exactly as it had sounded in the gallery, fractured, ancient, beautiful in a way that made her bones ache. "I thought perhaps the fear would keep you away. The journals are explicit about what I am." Evangeline's throat was dry. She should have been terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call for Hartwell, to flee this house and never return. Instead, she found herself standing, drawn forward by something that operated beneath thought or reason. "You're real," she whispered. A smile moved across his face, sad, resigned, achingly tender. "As real as imprisonment allows. Your great-aunt was a woman of considerable power. She kept me suspended between life and death, existence and void, for more than a century. The portrait was a cage, and I was the thing caged." He paused, his gaze moving across her face as though memorizing it. "But the cage was failing. I could feel the boundaries weakening each dark moon, and then you came, and the magic shattered entirely." "Why?" Evangeline's voice trembled. "Why are you here? Why show yourself to me?" Thaddeus moved closer, not threatening, but with the careful slowness of someone approaching a frightened animal. Evangeline's breath caught. She could feel the wrongness radiating from him now. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature, an absence of the vital heat that human bodies carried. The air around him seemed thinner, as though his very presence drained the life from the space he occupied. "Because," he said softly, "I have waited 300 years to speak to an Ashford woman who would listen. Because your great-aunt's barrier is gone, and I am free for the first time since my damnation. And because..." His eyes held hers. "You are the only thing in 3 centuries that I can touch without destroying." He extended his hand. Evangeline stared at it. She knew what touching him meant, The journals had warned her. His curse was literal. Anything living withered in contact with his skin. Plants died in his presence. Animals fled. Ordinary mortals would sicken and perish if he touched them long enough. It was the mechanism of his eternal isolation. The very nature of his curse ensured that he could never hold another living being without draining its life force away. Except her. The journals had been clear on that point. The old magic that binds you both makes you immune to his curse. "If I touch you," she said, "will you disappear? Will you return to the portrait?" "No." His hand remained extended, palm up, waiting. "The portrait was a prison of your family's making. I built that prison myself, 300 years ago, the night I realized what I had become. I sealed myself within it to prevent myself from becoming a monster beyond redemption. But you broke it open by being here, by carrying the Ashford blood through these halls. Now I am neither imprisoned nor free. I exist in the threshold between your world and the darkness that waits beyond it." "What are you?" Evangeline asked. "Truly, not what the journals hint at. What are you?" Thaddeus's expression twisted with something that might have been shame or might have been hunger. The line between the two seemed impossibly thin. "I was a priest," he said quietly. "In the time before your great-great ancestor built this house, I took vows of celibacy and devoted myself to God. But in the winter of 1523, I fell in love with a woman of the village. I broke my vows. I offered her the only immortality I could, not through God's grace but through blood and darkness. I became what I am through that corruption, that violation of everything I had sworn to protect." He stepped closer. She could smell him now. Old stone and copper, autumn leaves, and something ancient and metallic that made her mouth water despite her fear. "She rejected me," he continued. "The transformation began, but she fought me, and died screaming my name. The bishop called me cursed. They tried to burn me, but fire could not touch me. So I fled into the dark and learned to live in it. I learned that my touch brought death, divine punishment for the priest who had forgotten his God. For centuries, I wandered alone, unable to hold anything living, unable to die, unable to seek forgiveness because there was nothing left to forgive me. And then, he said, an Ashford woman walked into the forest alone, and when I touched her, she did not wither. The curse broke itself against her blood like waves against stone, and for the first time in 300 years, I was not entirely alone." His hand was still extended. Evangeline looked at his fingers, long, elegant, deathly pale. She thought of the journals. She thought of every woman who had come before her, drawn by blood and destiny into this impossible dance. She thought of her great-aunt, spending her life maintaining a prison to contain this beautiful, terrible thing, and then she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the library erupted with sensation. It was not cold. It was beyond cold, a sensation so intense it burned like fire. But beneath the shock of it, she felt something else. Relief. Ancient, profound relief. As though he had been holding his breath for 3 centuries and was finally allowed to exhale. His fingers closed around hers gently, as though she were made of glass. "Welcome home, Evangeline Ashford," he whispered. "I have been waiting such a long time." And in the firelight their joined hands cast a single shadow on the wall, inseparable, intertwined, already becoming something neither wholly alive nor wholly dead. The hand-holding lasted only moments before Thaddeus released her, stepping back as though the contact itself required all his remaining restraint. His chest rose and fell in breaths he didn't technically need. The habit of mortality, she realized, lingering in the shell of what he'd become. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rough. The journals will have told you that proximity to me drains vitality. Even you, immune to my curse, will feel the weight of it. But Evangeline didn't want to sleep. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to fill the centuries of silence between them with words and understanding. Instead, she found herself asking, "Will you leave?" "I cannot leave Blackthorn," he said. "The estate is bound to me through blood oath and dark magic. I am tied to this house as surely as a ghost is tied to the place of its death. I can walk its grounds, inhabit its rooms, but beyond the boundaries your great-aunt set, I cease to exist. I am vampiric only in name. I am something older, something more terrible, a thing caught between the world and the void." He turned toward the fireplace, and in profile his beauty was almost unbearable. The sharp line of his jaw, the hollows beneath his cheekbones. He looked starved in a way that had nothing to do with hunger for food. "You should hate me," he continued. "Everything in those journals should have taught you to fear me, to despise what I am. Instead, you touch my hand as though I were not a walking abomination." "Perhaps I'm foolish," Evangeline said softly. "No." His eyes found hers again. "You are Ashford. Your bloodline was drawn to me across generations for a reason. There is something in your family's ancient line that recognizes what I was before the darkness consumed me. Something that resonates with the priest I was, not the monster I became." He moved toward the window, where November rain hammered against the glass. Outside, the moors were invisible beneath fog and darkness. The world seemed to end at the panes. "I have not fed in 3 months," Thaddeus said quietly. "Not since your great-aunt's death." The barrier she maintained also sustained me, a thin stream of life force, enough to maintain existence but not enough to truly live. Now that barrier is gone, and I am diminished. Evangeline understood what he was asking before he asked it. "If I offered?" she began. "No." The refusal was immediate and absolute. "I will not take from you. To feed on your blood would create a bond between us that transcends the already impossible connection we share. It would bind your life to mine in ways you cannot fathom. You would begin to change, to shift toward what I am. Over months or years, the transformation would be inevitable. You would lose your humanity piece by piece, until you were neither living nor dead, but existing in this twilight hell with me. Yet every Ashford woman in those journals chose it," he finished, "or came close to choosing it. Because the bond, once tasted, is addictive. It is not mere feeding. It is intimacy at the most fundamental level. It is knowing another being completely, their memories bleeding into yours, their desires becoming your own. It is love in its most primal form. Blood love, soul love, the kind that transcends death itself." He paused, his shoulders rigid with tension. "But they were not immortal. They aged, and I did not. Their love became torment. In the end, most of them chose to let me go, to live out their mortal spans and die in beds surrounded by grandchildren, and I remained here, waiting for the next generation to carry the cursed blood." Evangeline's heart ached at the portrait of endless loss he painted. "Is that what you think will happen with me?" "I don't know," he said, and the honesty in those words was almost more devastating than any lie would have been. "You are different. Your great-aunt bound me with magic meant to contain me. But you walked into this house knowing what I was, and you came to find me anyway. There is a difference between compulsion and choice." A sound interrupted them, a sharp cry from somewhere deeper in the manor. Thaddeus's head snapped toward the door, his entire body tensing with predatory awareness. "What was that?" Evangeline moved toward the corridor. "Hartwell," Thaddeus said grimly. "The groundskeeper. His wife warned you to avoid me, but he has always been braver than wise." They found him in the eastern corridor, collapsed against the wall. His arm was bleeding, a deep gash that must have come from the broken glass of a fallen candelabra. His face was deathly pale, and his breathing came in shallow, panicked gasps. "I saw—" he wheezed, his eyes wide with horror. "I saw him in the portrait room, miss. I went to check the eastern wing, and he was just standing there. I tried to stop him. Tried to—" His voice broke. "The cold. God help me. The cold of him. It burns worse than fire." Thaddeus knelt beside the old man, his movements careful, controlled. "I did not touch you," he said quietly. "My presence alone causes this. You will recover, Hartwell. The pain will fade. Stay back." Hartwell's hand flew protectively toward his bleeding arm. But Evangeline saw what was about to happen. She read it in the sudden tightening of Thaddeus's jaw, the flare of his pupils until they consumed the whites of his eyes entirely. The scent of blood had triggered something primal in him, something that overrode centuries of control. Without thinking, she stepped forward and seized his wrist. "Thaddeus," she said, using his name for the first time. "Look at me." His black eyes snapped to hers. For a moment she saw the hunger in their depths, a void so absolute it seemed to want to consume the world itself. His fangs extended, white and terrible and beautiful, as his lips pulled back in a grimace of denial. "Leave," he snarled, "both of you, before you what?" Evangeline moved closer, not away. "Feed on an old man to ease the thirst that's been burning in you for months?" She extended her other arm, pulling up the sleeve of her emerald gown. Her wrist lay bare and pale, the blue vein just beneath the skin visible in the corridor's dim light. "No," Thaddeus breathed. "Evangeline, don't—" "Not a bond," she said. "Not yet. Just enough to sustain you. Just enough so that you're not a danger to those who serve this house." She pressed her wrist to his mouth before he could protest further. The sensation was extraordinary, pain and pleasure braided together, exquisite and terrible. She felt his fangs pierce her skin, felt the moment he drew her blood into himself. And with it came something else, a flood of connection, so intense it shattered her breath. She saw him, not as he was now, but as he had been, a young priest, scarred and beautiful, kneeling in a stone chapel. She felt his despair when the bishop called him cursed. She experienced his centuries of solitude like a living thing, vast and suffocating. She felt his terror when she arrived at Blackthorn, when he realized he could finally touch another living being without destroying it. She felt his love, burning like a black star in the center of his being. When he released her, she staggered back, gasping. The world seemed brighter and darker simultaneously. Thaddeus's eyes had returned to their normal black, but they glowed now with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been anguish. "You should not have done that," he whispered, but his hand trembled as he reached toward her, and didn't pull away when she took it. Hartwell recovered within hours, though the experience left him shaken enough that he requested immediate leave from Blackthorn. Evangeline paid him triple his annual wages and promised to hire a replacement, a promise she suspected she would have difficulty keeping, given the manor's cursed reputation. By dawn, he was gone, his carriage disappearing into the fog like a ghost retreating into its proper realm. Evangeline didn't sleep. Instead, she found herself in the library with Thaddeus, surrounded by journals and candlelight, asking the questions that had been burning in her since she'd tasted his blood and experienced that overwhelming flood of sensation and memory. "You said I was different," she began, curled into a wingback chair while he stood by the shelves, careful to maintain distance. The taste of his blood still lingered on her tongue. Not unpleasant, she'd discovered, but addictive in a way that made her ache. Different from the other women, but the journals suggest they all carried immunity too. They did. Thaddeus confirmed, pulling a volume from the shelf. Not one of the journals, but an older text, its leather cover cracked with age. Because they were all descended from the woman I should have chosen from the beginning. He opened the book, revealing pages written in a hand far older than Lady Margaret's, the handwriting spiky and difficult, rendered in faded ink that had turned sepia with age. Her name was Catherine Ashford, Thaddeus continued. In 1523, when I was still Father Thaddeus Corvain, she was the village healer's daughter. The entire parish knew I was infatuated with her. My vows meant nothing against the gravity of her presence. She was brilliant, fierce, entirely unsuited to the meek submission the church demanded of women. He pointed to an entry, dated in the margin, 25th of October 1523. I offered her immortality not as a seduction, but as an escape. I thought she would be grateful. That eternal life with me would be preferable to a mortal existence constrained by gender and circumstance. I was arrogant. I was a fool. Evangeline read the passage beneath his finger. He came to me in the forest with promises of eternity. I saw what he was trying to become, a thing neither living nor dead, and I understood that he had made a terrible choice. But I loved him enough to refuse him. I would not let him trap me in his damnation. Instead, I offered him something else, a binding, not of blood, but of soul. I took his hand and spoke words my mother's mother taught me, old words, older than the church, older than civilization. I bound his curse to my bloodline. Every daughter born to my line would carry immunity to his curse. They would be drawn to him across generations. Yes, that was the price of binding. But they would also be the one thing he could never destroy. I gave him a chain, but I gave him a chance at redemption too. Evangeline looked up from the page. She bound you to her bloodline deliberately? She did, Thaddeus said quietly. Catherine understood what I could not, that immortality without connection is merely prolonged torture. By binding herself and her descendants to me, she ensured that I would never be entirely alone, but she also ensured that every woman born into her line would feel the pull toward me, would search for me across their lifetimes, would be compelled to confront what I am. That sounds like a curse disguised as mercy, Evangeline said. It was both, he replied. Catherine was a wise woman. She knew that I required suffering to balance the gift of eternity. She knew that constant loss, each woman aging while I remained unchanging, would be the only force powerful enough to keep me from becoming a true monster. And she was right. The cycle of connection and loss, repeated across centuries, has been my purgatory. It has kept me, mostly, human. He moved to the window, where dawn was beginning to break gray and reluctant over the moors. But Catherine also embedded something else in the binding, a possibility. She said that if ever a woman of her bloodline came to Blackthorn freely, not compelled by the manor's magic, but by choice, and if that woman offered her blood willingly, then the binding could be broken, the curse could be lifted. I could finally be released from this twilight existence. Evangeline's pulse quickened. Released how? Transformation, Thaddeus said. True transformation. I could become fully alive again, or I could embrace what I am completely and become a creature of genuine immortality, still cursed, still bound to Blackthorn, but no longer caught between states. Or, he paused, his shoulders tightening, or I could choose obliteration. Catherine's binding included that mercy. I could choose to cease existing entirely. Why are you telling me this? Evangeline whispered, though she thought she already knew. Because Thaddeus turned to face her, and his expression held centuries of longing and resignation. You came here knowing what I was. You read the journals. You understood the implications of this house, this curse, my existence. And you came anyway. Not because you were compelled by magic, but because some part of you, some whisper in your Ashford blood, called to me across time. He crossed the room and knelt before her chair, his beautiful, terrible face level with hers. Catherine's binding is complete. Your immunity proves it. Your presence here proves it. The question now is, what will you do with that power? Evangeline's hands trembled. I don't understand. You have the ability to free me, he said softly. If you offer your blood willingly, if you speak the words of binding and make a true covenant with me, not just the accidental connection of the Ashford line, but a conscious, deliberate choice, then I will be released from Catherine's spell. I could become what I wish to be, or I could finally rest. His hand rose to her face, his fingertips barely brushing her cheekbone. She felt the cold radiating from him, the wrongness of his touch, the hunger that lived beneath his refined exterior. But I will not ask it of you, he continued. I will not push you toward that choice. You are young, and the world beyond these moors is vast and full of genuine life. You could leave Blackthorn tomorrow and never look back. Your immunity to my curse means you could live a normal existence. You could love a normal man, bear normal children, die in the ordinary way. And if I don't leave? His eyes searched hers. If you don't leave, then we begin a dance older than Christianity, older than the manor itself. We begin Catherine's cycle anew. And perhaps, just perhaps, we might find a way to rewrite it. Not as curse, but as choice. Not as damnation, but as covenant. Behind them, the candles burned lower. Outside, the moors shifted from black to gray to a sickly yellow-green, as though the world itself was bruised by the weight of what they were discussing. Evangeline thought of the journals. She thought of every woman who had come before her, pulled by destiny and blood into this impossible dance. She thought of Thaddeus, waiting 300 years in a painted prison for someone to choose him, truly choose him, without compulsion or destiny. I need time, she said finally, to understand what all of this means, to know myself before I bind myself to anyone or anything. Thaddeus inclined his head, accepting the refusal with grace that made her heart break. Of course, you have until the dark moon. Catherine's binding grows strongest then. If you choose to break it, that is when the magic will respond most readily. He rose, and the distance between them expanded once more into safety and longing. How long until the dark moon? Evangeline asked. 14 days, Thaddeus replied. 14 days for you to decide whether you will free me, destroy me, or damn us both. The first week passed in a strange liminal state. Evangeline moved through Blackthorn Manor like a ghost, herself attending to practical matters, hiring new staff, inventorying the house, attempting to establish some semblance of normal routine, while her mind spiraled through the implications of what Thaddeus had revealed. She saw him in the margins of her days. He would appear at dusk in the library, materializing from shadow as though he'd never truly left. They spoke of inconsequential things, books, history, the architecture of the manor. But beneath every conversation ran an undercurrent of terrible awareness. She was deciding his fate. In 14 days, she would either free him or condemn him to continued imprisonment. It was on the 8th day that everything fractured. She'd gone to the catacombs beneath the manor, a place marked on an old map she'd discovered, located somewhere beneath the eastern wing. Hartwell had warned her away from them, but Evangeline found herself drawn to the hidden places of Blackthorn as though they contained answers she desperately needed. The entrance was disguised behind a stone panel in the library's western wall. Beyond it lay a spiral staircase descending into absolute darkness. Evangeline lit her lantern and began the long descent, her footsteps echoing in a space so vast it seemed to swallow sound itself. The catacombs had been built centuries before the manor above them. Stone walls bore the marks of ancient tools. Niches carved into the rock held nothing now but dust and the remains of candles long since burned to nothing. Evangeline realized with a creeping sense of understanding that this was a monastery, or had been once. These were the burial chambers of monks long dead. At the catacomb's heart lay a circular chamber. The walls were covered in symbols, some religious, some older than religion itself. And in the center stood an altar of black stone, stained with substances that had long since dried to near invisibility. This was where it had happened, where Thaddeus had undergone his transformation. I wondered when you would find this place. Evangeline spun. Thaddeus stood in the catacomb entrance, and something about him was different. His composure had fractured. His eyes held a wild, desperate quality that made her breath catch. I shouldn't be here, she said. No, he agreed. But you are. And now I find myself unable to maintain the fiction I've been constructing for your benefit. He descended into the chamber, and with each step he seemed to shed layers of restraint. His movements became less human, too fluid, too graceful, utterly wrong in a way that set every survival instinct she possessed screaming. I have been gentle with you, Thaddeus continued, his voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate from deeper than his chest. I have pretended at humanity, at control, at the possibility that I might be something other than the monster the bishop declared me. But standing here, in the place where I died and was reborn as this, I can no longer lie to you or to myself. His form began to shift. It was subtle at first, the lengthening of his shadows, the deepening of his voice. Then his fingers extended, nails becoming talons of obsidian black. His fangs emerged fully, not the brief glimpse she'd seen after he fed on her wrist, but fully extended, terrible and magnificent. This is what I am, he said, not a man cursed with vampirism, not a priest trapped in a supernatural form. This is my true nature, Evangeline. This is what Catherine's binding could not hide, only delay. His skin began to mottle, not with decay, but with something that might have been scales, or might have been shadow itself made manifest. Wings unfurled from his shoulders, vast and dark as a starless sky, their edges seeming to cut the very air they moved through. Evangeline should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, she found herself transfixed by the terrible beauty of his transformation. He was a creature of nightmare and legend, something between angel and demon, neither fully one nor the other. In the earliest days, Thaddeus's voice had become something other, layered with echoes, as though 1,000 voices spoke through his singular form. Before the church attempted to classify all existence as either blessed or damned, creatures like me were common. We were neither living nor dead, but something that existed in the threshold between worlds. We were the gods of old religions, the demons of new ones. We were hunger and eternity given form. He extended one massive wing toward her, and Evangeline saw that it was not made of feathers, but of darkness itself. Pure absence of light, held in a terrible, specific shape. The priest who became me made a choice, he continued. Rather than accept what I was, I tried to compress myself into human form. I tried to pretend that my hunger was merely vampiric bloodlust, that my immortality was a curse rather than a revelation. I tried to be something the world could understand, something Catherine's binding could contain. He folded his wings, and the motion sent a wind through the catacomb that extinguished half her candles. But Catherine was wise enough to know the truth. You cannot hide what you are forever. The binding keeps me from consuming this entire region, from spreading my curse like a plague. It keeps me anchored to Blackthorn, where I can do no harm beyond these boundaries. But it cannot make me human. Nothing can. Evangeline took a step toward him rather than away. Why are you showing me this? Because you must understand what you're being asked to choose, Thaddeus said, and his voice was almost gentle now, despite the otherworldly quality. If you break Catherine's binding, you don't free a cursed man to become mortal again. You unleash a creature that has been compressed and contained for 300 years. I could attempt true immortality, embrace what I am completely, and become something the world has nightmares about. Or I could choose obliteration, let myself be unmade entirely, or... He paused, his inhuman eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that seemed to pierce her very soul. Or you could offer yourself as the binding's replacement. You could take Catherine's place, renew the spell with your blood, and I would return to this semi-human form. I would be contained again, but this time knowingly, willingly, with you as both my prison and my salvation. His wings folded completely, receding back into his shoulders as his form shifted again, not fully human, but closer. The talons remained, the teeth, but his eyes returned to their familiar black, holding that same ancient sorrow she'd seen in the portrait. That, he said softly, is the true choice before you. Not freedom or destruction, but continuation. A different kind of covenant than Catherine created. One chosen rather than imposed. One that would bind us both, equally, irrevocably. Evangeline's heart thundered in her chest. And if I refuse both options? Then I will break the binding myself, Thaddeus said. On the dark moon, I will walk beyond Blackthorn's borders and let the void consume me. I will cease to exist, and Catherine's line will finally be free. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the wrongness radiating from him, that terrible cold, that absence of life. But she did not move away. 3 days remain, he said. 3 days until the dark moon rises. Choose carefully, Evangeline Ashford. Your decision will echo across eternity. The riders came on the 10th night, emerging from the fog like harbingers of apocalypse. Evangeline was in the library when she heard them, the distant thunder of hoofbeats, the baying of dogs that sounded wrong, too large, too hungry. She ran to the window and saw them materializing on the drive, 7 figures on horseback, dressed entirely in black, their cloaks billowing despite the absence of wind. Vampire hunters. They can sense me, Thaddeus said from behind her, his voice sharp with something that might have been fear or might have been fury. He'd appeared without warning, as he always did, but his usual careful distance had vanished. He stood directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his form like a physical presence. The binding is weakening. My true nature bleeds through more each day. To those trained to see such things, I am now visible as a beacon in the darkness. Who are they? Evangeline's voice trembled. The Inquisition Nocturna, Thaddeus said grimly, an order founded in the 1600s to hunt creatures like me. They've searched for Blackthorn for decades, following rumors and legends, but they could never breach the manor's boundaries while Catherine's binding held. Now, with only days until the dark moon, the magic is failing. The wards are collapsing. A stone struck the manor's eastern wall, not thrown by hand, but propelled with supernatural force. It struck with the sound of an explosion and cracks spiderwebbed across the ancient masonry. They're testing the structure, Thaddeus continued, seeking weak points. When they find them, they'll attempt entry. And if they succeed, they will burn this manor to the ground and me with it. They will not permit negotiation or mercy. To them, I am abomination incarnate. Another stone struck, this time striking the library window. The glass fractured in a complex web of fractures but held. Evangeline turned to face him. In the candlelight, she could see the barely restrained transformation lurking beneath his human facade. The edges of his form seemed to shimmer slightly, as though he existed only partially in this reality. "We have to run," she said. "Leave Blackthorn, escape into—" "I cannot leave," Thaddeus interrupted. The binding tethers me to this manor. If I cross beyond its borders, I will cease to exist. Catherine's spell ensures it. I am tied here as surely as a spirit is tied to the place of its death. Then we fight. With what? Thaddeus gestured to the window, where the hunters were dismounting, beginning to arrange themselves in a ceremonial formation around the manor. They are trained in the art of destroying creatures like me. They carry consecrated weapons, blessed salt, holy water imbued with prayers older than Christianity itself. Against them, I am nearly defenseless. The front doors shuddered as something struck them from outside, a battering ram, or perhaps a spell given physical form. Dust rained from the ceiling. Unless, Thaddeus said slowly, his eyes fixing on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, you complete the binding now, before the dark moon, before they breach these walls. What? Offer me your blood, he said urgently. Not as you did before, not as a temporary relief of hunger. Offer it as Catherine offered hers, as a covenant, a deliberate binding of our essences. Speak the words of transformation, and we will become one entity. The hunter's weapons are designed to destroy creatures like me, but they have no protocols for what we would become. Neither vampire nor human, but something that exists between the two. Something they cannot classify, cannot categorize, cannot destroy. The doors struck again. This time they buckled inward, ancient wood splintering. You're asking me to... I'm asking you to save us both, Thaddeus said. He seized her hand, and the cold of his touch was almost unbearable. Not with 14 days to contemplate the choice, but now, in this moment, with the hunters at our threshold. Not as a binding that traps me in imprisonment, but as a union that transforms us both into something new. Something neither of us has been before. Evangeline heard shouts from outside. She could see flickering light through the windows. Torches, she realized. They were preparing to set the manor ablaze. If I do this, she said, what happens to me? You begin the transformation, Thaddeus said. Not immediately. Not completely. But over time, days and weeks, you will begin to shift toward what I am. You will become less mortal, more immortal. You will gain my senses, my strength, my ability to move through darkness as though it were daylight. You will lose the need for sleep, for food, for the ordinary rhythms of human life. I will become a monster. You will become, Thaddeus corrected, what I have always been, a creature caught between states, belonging fully to neither world. But you will belong to me, and I to you. We will not be alone in the darkness anymore. The front doors burst inward. Hunters poured into the entrance hall, their weapons raised, blades that seemed to glow with inner light, staffs that crackled with sacred energy. Now, Thaddeus pulled her toward him. Choose now, Evangeline. She could hear the hunters ascending the main staircase, could hear the thunder of their footsteps. She had seconds, perhaps less. Evangeline raised her wrist to Thaddeus's mouth. Take my blood, she said. Bind us. I choose you. I choose this. I choose. His fangs pierced her skin, and the world exploded into sensation. She felt her blood flowing into him, felt it carrying her consciousness, her essence, her very soul into his being. But simultaneously, his essence flowed into her. A torrent of memories, centuries of experience, the accumulated weight of his immortality. She saw a young priest kneeling in candlelight, taking vows he would break. She felt the moment of transformation, the agony and ecstasy of becoming something other. She experienced the endless centuries of isolation, the cycle of connection and loss, the grinding despair of immortality without companionship. And beneath it all, she felt his love, ancient, absolute, burning like a star at the center of his being. The hunters burst into the library to find them joined. Thaddeus with his fangs at her wrist, Evangeline with her eyes closed, her body beginning to glow with a light that was neither holy nor profane, but something that existed in the threshold between the two. The hunters stopped, confusion flickering across their faces, because what they saw before them was not a vampire and a mortal, but something new. Something that had never existed before. A fusion, a becoming, a transcendence of everything they had been trained to understand. Evangeline opened her eyes, and they were no longer human. They were black, fathomless, holding the depth of centuries. When she spoke, her voice held harmonics, hers and Thaddeus's layered together, creating something that was both singular and dual. "I am Evangeline," she said, "and I am Thaddeus. We are bound, we are one, and you will not take him from me." The hunters raised their weapons, but hesitation trembled in their movements. They were facing something their entire doctrine had not prepared them for. The trial was about to begin. The first blade was consecrated silver, blessed by a cardinal 3 centuries past. It sang through the air with a sound like a scream, aimed directly at Thaddeus's heart. But Evangeline moved, not with human speed, but with something faster, something that seemed to bend space and time around her motion. She intercepted the blade with her bare hand, and it bit deep into her palm, drawing blood that glowed with an ethereal luminescence. The hunter who'd thrown it gasped. Holy water, consecrated steel, these weapons should have destroyed her. Instead, she stood unharmed, bleeding light. "What sorcery is this?" one of the hunters demanded, his voice trembling. But Evangeline didn't answer. She could feel Thaddeus's presence layered beneath her own consciousness now, a constant awareness that was both comforting and terrifying. Through his senses, she perceived the hunters differently, not as men, but as prey, as sources of heat and blood and life. The hunger that had always been theoretical to her became suddenly, viscerally real. A second blade came, this one from a younger hunter whose faith seemed to burn almost brighter than the others. It was aimed at her now, not Thaddeus, as though they'd realized that the man and woman before them were no longer separate entities to be targeted individually. Evangeline caught this blade as well, but the motion cost her. The holy metal burned where it touched her skin, drawing not just blood, but something else. Energy, essence, the vital force that was beginning to make up her transformed nature. She stumbled backward, and Thaddeus's presence surged forward in her mind, merging more completely with her own consciousness. For a moment they were truly one, singular, unified, utterly intertwined. Through his eyes, she saw the library as he perceived it, the hunter's auras burning with zealous faith, the ancient stone of blackthorn thrumming with the magic that had contained him for 3 centuries, and herself as he saw her, radiant, transforming, becoming. "Hold." His voice resonated through her mind, beneath thought and language. "Let me show you what we can be." The binding completed itself. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. There was no explosion of light or thunderous revelation. Instead, it was intimate, a settling, a rightness, as though 2 pieces of a puzzle that had been separated across centuries finally found their perfect alignment. Evangeline felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the very structure of her being. She was no longer entirely human, and Thaddeus was no longer entirely alone. She rose to her feet, and the hunters took an involuntary step backward. Her wounds were already healing, not slowly, but visibly, the light blood drawing back into her skin as though it had never been spilled. Her eyes had fully transformed now, black as Thaddeus's, but deeper still, holding new dimensions of sight. She could perceive the hunters in multiple spectrums simultaneously. Their physical forms, their auras of faith and fear, the subtle network of life force flowing through their bodies. "You cannot destroy what we've become," Evangeline said, and her voice carried the weight of both her will and Thaddeus's ancient power. "We are not vampire. We are not human. We are covenant-made flesh, bond transcending death and mortality." The lead hunter, a woman with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that held the particular coldness of absolute conviction, stepped forward. "Abomination," she spat. "Unholy fusion. We have encountered such creatures before. They are more dangerous than mere vampires, for they possess the cunning of both mortal and monster. They must be destroyed completely, utterly, with no possibility of resurrection." She raised her staff, and it ignited with sacred flame. Not the orange and red of ordinary fire, but white-hot, burning with the fury of sanctified wrath. The other hunters joined her, forming a circle around Evangeline and Thaddeus, their combined faith creating a barrier of holy power that made the very air crackle. "We banish you," the woman intoned, and the other hunters echoed her words. "By the power vested in this order, by the authority of the divine, we cast you out from the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. We consign you to the void between." Evangeline felt the magic beginning to work. It was designed to tear apart beings caught between states, to shred the fabric that held hybrid creatures in existence. Against a vampire or a ghost, it might have been merely painful. Against what she and Thaddeus had become, it was potentially catastrophic. Through their shared consciousness, she felt his fear, not for himself, but for her. He was terrified that the binding would unravel, that she would be destroyed before the transformation could fully complete. Without conscious thought, Evangeline made a choice. She dove forward, straight toward the circle of hunters, straight into the center of their holy fire. The pain was extraordinary, worse than anything she'd experienced. The sacred flame burned through her transformation, seeking the point where her human essence still lingered, attempting to ignite it from within. But as it burned, something else happened. The fire reached her blood, and her blood, infused now with Thaddeus's ancient power and her own human vitality, did not burn. It absorbed the flame, transformed it, incorporated it into her being. She stood at the center of the hunter's circle, wreathed in holy fire, and she did not perish. "Impossible," the lead hunter breathed. Through the binding, Evangeline felt Thaddeus's realization mirror her own. The covenant wasn't just survival, it was evolution. Each attack that came against them would only strengthen the bond. They were becoming something that drew power from opposition itself. Thaddeus emerged from behind her, stepping into the sacred flame without hesitation. Where the fire touched him, it did not burn. It illuminated. His half-human form became visible in all its terrible beauty. The wings folded against his shoulders, the remnants of his priestly grace layered beneath his vampiric nature, and something new, something created specifically by the binding with Evangeline, beginning to manifest. A kind of wholeness, a reconciliation of opposites that should have been irreconcilable. "We are not what your doctrine prepared you for," Evangeline said, extending her hand toward Thaddeus. Their fingers intertwined, and where their skin touched, the light intensified. "We are not corruption or abomination. We are transformation. We are the bridge between worlds." The hunter's circle flickered. Their faith, unshakable moments before, began to fracture under the weight of witnessing something that fundamentally contradicted their understanding of reality. "Destroy them!" the lead hunter commanded desperately. "All of you! Pour everything into—" But she never finished, because Evangeline and Thaddeus, moving as one entity despite remaining physically separate, turned toward the hunters with eyes that held the accumulated weight of 3 centuries of loneliness and immortal sorrow. They opened their mouths, and from their joined throats emerged a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a song. a pure expression of the covenant that bound them, a resonance that carried the truth of their transformation. The hunters fell to their knees, overwhelmed. Several of them wept. One dropped his weapon entirely, his faith temporarily shattered by the confrontation with something that transcended his ability to comprehend or condemn. In that moment of vulnerability, Evangeline and Thaddeus could have destroyed them all. Instead, they simply held their joined hands higher, letting the light of their covenant burn brighter, an offering and a warning in equal measure. The trial, they understood, was far from over. But they would face it together. The silence that followed was absolute. The hunters remained on their knees, their faith temporarily shattered by the impossibility of what they'd witnessed. The lead hunter, Sister Margot, Evangeline would later learn, was the first to speak, her voice stripped of its zealous certainty. What are you?" she whispered. Evangeline and Thaddeus did not answer immediately. Instead, they stood in the center of the library, hands joined, their forms still glowing with the light of their completed binding. Around them, the ancient books seemed to lean inward, as though witnessing something momentous. The very stones of Blackthorn Manor hummed with recognition. The curse that had imprisoned Thaddeus for 3 centuries was transforming, shifting from captivity to covenant. When Thaddeus finally spoke, his voice held none of the bitterness or despair that had characterized it before. It was whole now, integrated, carrying both his ancient sorrow and Evangeline's mortal hope. "We are what Catherine Ashford envisioned when she created the binding," he said. "Not a curse contained, but a choice embraced. Not a monster imprisoned, but a soul redeemed through love." He turned toward Sister Margot, and the nun flinched. Not from fear, but from the sudden weight of understanding. Looking into his eyes, she could see what he was. Not an abomination, but a being caught between states, held in balance not by chains, but by genuine devotion. "I was a priest once," Thaddeus continued. "I took vows to serve God and uphold the sanctity of human life. Those vows broke when I chose darkness over duty. For 300 years I have lived in exile from grace, separated from redemption by the very nature of what I had become." He paused, his gaze moving to Evangeline. Through their bond, she felt the immensity of what he was about to confess, not just to the hunters, but to himself. "But grace," he said softly, "is sometimes found in the places we least expect. It is found in a woman who reads her family's dark history and comes seeking the monster at the heart of it. It is found in the willingness to be transformed by love rather than destroyed by it. It is found in covenant, not the covenant of curse and captivity, but the covenant of 2 souls choosing each other across the abyss of immortality and mortality." Evangeline squeezed his hand, and through the binding she transmitted her own confession, the fear that had driven her to Blackthorn, the loneliness that had made his ancient isolation feel like recognition, the desperate need to be known that had made her willing to offer her blood and her very self. Sister Margot rose slowly to her feet, her hand no longer gripping her staff with the rigidity of zealous certainty. "The Order's doctrine teaches that such unions are impossible, that the sacred and profane cannot coexist, that fear is easier than understanding," Evangeline interrupted gently. "Your order was founded to destroy what it could not comprehend. But comprehension is possible. Redemption is possible. Even for creatures like us, especially for creatures like us." She extended her free hand toward the nun. "The binding is complete," Evangeline continued, "not through violence or coercion, but through willing choice. Thaddeus is no longer the cursed vampire lord imprisoned in Blackthorn Manor. He is no longer the thing that must be destroyed to protect humanity. He is bound now to me, and through that binding, to something larger than either of us alone. He is redeemed, not by clerical absolution or divine intervention, but by being truly seen and truly loved by another person. Sister Margot stared at the extended hand, her entire world-view visibly crumbling. After a long moment, she reached out and took it. Where her skin touched Evangeline's, there was no burning, no recoil. Instead, the nun felt the truth of the binding, a resonance that existed beyond doctrine or dogma, a reality that could not be denied by those willing to perceive it honestly. The other hunters, watching this interaction, began to lower their weapons. The lead hunter among them, a man called Father Aldous, his face lined with decades of hunting and killing, stepped forward. "If what you say is true," he said carefully, "then we have been in error. We have pursued you across centuries, believing you to be a threat that must be eliminated. But what we encounter now is not a threat. It is a transformation that our order's teachings never anticipated. Your order was built on the assumption that creatures like me can never be redeemed," Thaddeus said. "That darkness, once embraced, cannot be transcended. But Catherine Ashford understood something your founders did not. That redemption is not about erasing what you are, but about choosing how you will exist. It is not about becoming human again, but about becoming something that can contain both the monster and the person simultaneously." He raised his other hand, extending it toward Father Aldous. "I offer you no promises that your hunt must end. The Inquisition Nocturna can choose to continue pursuing creatures like me to maintain their war against darkness, but I ask that you choose to see us as we are now, not threats, but witnesses to a possibility that transcends your doctrine. We are proof that even the most cursed can find redemption through love." Father Aldous accepted the offered hand, and the gesture was profound. Not surrender, but recognition. Understanding. Within the hour, the hunters had gathered their weapons and prepared to depart. Sister Margot, however, remained behind, requesting shelter for the night. As the other hunters rode into the fog, she sat with Evangeline and Thaddeus in the library, surrounded by candlelight and ancient books, and they spoke long into the darkness. "Your order will not accept this," Thaddeus warned gently. "When you return with word that I still exist, still thrive, still possess power beyond their ability to destroy, they will send hunters more fanatical, more willing to sacrifice innocence in pursuit of their mission." "Perhaps," Sister Margot acknowledged, "but I will tell them what I have witnessed. I will tell them that redemption is possible, that love is a force more powerful than faith alone, that transformation can occur even in the most cursed of beings. Some will listen, others will not. But the seed will be planted. Doctrine, like nature, must sometimes evolve to accommodate truth it did not previously perceive." As dawn approached, Sister Margot prepared to leave. Before departing, she performed an action that made Evangeline's breath catch. She removed her silver cross, the symbol of her office in the Inquisition, and placed it on the library table. "I cannot remain with you," the nun said. "My order is my life, and I do not possess the courage to abandon it entirely. But I can no longer hunt you in good conscience. I offer you this symbol as a bridge, a declaration that there exists, within the order, at least one who recognizes your legitimacy." After she left, Evangeline and Thaddeus stood alone in the morning light, the silver cross glinting between them. "Do you think she was sincere?" Evangeline asked. "I believe," Thaddeus said, "that she was doing what humans do best, reconciling contradiction through the power of personal experience. She came expecting to destroy a monster. Instead, she witnessed love. That experience will reshape everything she believes about the nature of redemption." He drew Evangeline closer, and she felt the full depth of their binding settle around them like a benediction. They were no longer separate entities bound by magical necessity. They were genuinely, fully merged. two souls that had chosen each other across the barrier of death and immortality itself. "We are acknowledged," Thaddeus whispered against her hair. "Not by the Inquisition, not by the world, but by ourselves, and by those willing to see truth. That is sufficient." Evangeline raised her face to his, and when their lips met, the kiss held the weight of 3 centuries of longing and the promise of an eternity yet to come. 3 days before the dark moon, a messenger arrived bearing a sealed letter bearing the Inquisition's official seal. Sister Margot had kept her word. She had delivered her testimony to the Order's council. But the response was not clemency. It was escalation. The letter, written in archaic Latin and signed by the Order's patriarch himself, declared Evangeline and Thaddeus heretics of the highest order. More than that, it declared Sister Margot complicit in their corruption and ordered her execution. But most damning of all, it announced that a final tribunal would be convened at Blackthorn Manor on the night of the dark moon. Not a hunting party, not a band of zealous warriors, but the Order's most powerful practitioners of sacred magic. Those who had spent lifetimes studying the art of destroying beings caught between worlds. "They're going to attempt a banishment," Evangeline said, reading the letter by candlelight in their shared chamber. The manor had changed since their binding. Rooms that had been sealed for decades had opened, as though Blackthorn itself recognized the shift in its master. She and Thaddeus now occupied a suite in the western tower, overlooking the moors, their lives becoming increasingly intertwined. "Worse than banishment," Thaddeus corrected grimly. He stood by the window, staring out at the gathering fog. "They're going to attempt a severance. They'll try to separate us, to break the binding that holds us together and cast each of us into different states of existence. Me back into imprisonment or obliteration. You back into pure mortality, stripped of the immortality you've begun to inherit." "Can they do that?" "They can try," Thaddeus said. "And if they succeed, the consequences will be catastrophic. A forced severance would shatter both of us in ways that death could not. You would survive, but hollowed, carrying memories of immortality but unable to access it, forever aware of what you'd lost. And I would be unmade entirely, dissolved into the void between states with no anchor to hold me in existence." Evangeline felt the weight of that realization settle through their bond. She understood now what the patriarch intended, not merely to destroy them, but to inflict a punishment worse than death. To prove that even love could be broken by faith sufficiently rigid and powerful. "Then we have 3 days to prepare," she said. "To prepare for what?" Thaddeus turned to face her. "We cannot defeat them through force. Their magic is designed specifically to counter beings like us. We cannot flee. The binding anchors me to Blackthorn, and you, having begun the transformation, cannot survive beyond these boundaries for long. We cannot hide. They will find us eventually, and each day we delay only allows them to prepare more thoroughly." "Then we face them," Evangeline said, "but not as they expect." Through their bond, she transmitted her thoughts to him, not verbal, but conceptual, a kind of direct mind-to-mind communion that their binding had made possible. She showed him the strategy forming in her consciousness, not resistance, but acceptance, not fight, but transformation, not defense, but evolution. Thaddeus understood immediately, and through their connection, she felt his initial resistance war with comprehension. "It would mean completing your transformation," he said aloud, "accelerating the process from months or years to days. You would have to consume vast quantities of my blood to achieve it. You would have to surrender the last vestiges of your mortality entirely. Evangeline, you would never be able to return to the human world. You would be bound to Blackthorn, to me, forever." "I know," she said simply. "And you choose this? Willingly?" "I choose this," Evangeline confirmed, not because I'm being forced, but because I understand now what Catherine understood. She didn't bind herself to you to trap you, Thaddeus. She bound herself to trap herself, to ensure that you would always have someone who understood the cost of immortality, because they were paying it too. Every Ashford woman who came after her made the same choice in her own way, and I make it now, fully conscious of what it means. She extended her wrist toward him. Drink, she said. Take enough to accelerate the binding. Make me fully what you are. Make us truly one. Not just spiritually, but physically, genetically, completely. Thaddeus resisted for a long moment, his entire being rigid with the conflict between hunger and protection. But eventually, the hunger won. Not the hunger for blood, but for true companionship, for someone who would willingly walk the same eternal path. When he bit down, it was with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the feeding. Evangeline felt her blood flowing into him, felt it carrying not just vitality, but transformation. With each pulse of her heartbeat, she felt herself changing more fundamentally. Her skin began to take on a luminescent quality. Her eyes deepened into that particular black that marked their kind. Her senses expanded into spectrums of perception that had no names in any human language. It hurt, an exquisite bone-deep agony as her mortal cells restructured themselves into something immortal. But it also felt like coming home, like finally shedding a skin that had never quite fit. When Thaddeus finally released her, she was no longer merely transformed. She was complete. They spent the next 2 days in intensive preparation, drawing on both their combined consciousness and the resources that centuries of isolation had allowed Thaddeus to accumulate. The manor revealed secret chambers filled with artifacts of power, blessed and cursed both, representing centuries of supernatural artifacts that had either been hidden or deliberately imprisoned within Blackthorn's walls. On the evening before the dark moon, they stood together in the circular chamber deep beneath the manor, in the catacombs where Thaddeus's original transformation had occurred. The ancient symbols carved into the stone walls seemed to glow with renewed purpose. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Evangeline said, "I need you to know that I do not regret this. I do not regret choosing you, choosing this, choosing to become what I am now." "I know," Thaddeus replied, "and I need you to know that being truly seen by another person, after centuries of isolation, has been worth every moment of suffering that led to it." They embraced, not sexually, but spiritually, their bodies merging at the edges where light and shadow blurred together. In that moment, they existed in a state beyond separation, beyond individuality. They were truly one being experiencing itself from two simultaneous perspectives. As midnight approached, they ascended from the catacombs to stand on the manor's highest tower, overlooking the moors. In the distance, they could see torches approaching, the Inquisition's final tribunal, arriving to perform the severance ritual. Evangeline felt no fear. Instead, she felt a kind of clarity, a sense that they were approaching a moment that would define not just their own existence, but perhaps reshape the very nature of what redemption could mean. "Are you ready?" Thaddeus asked. "I've been ready since the moment I entered this manor," Evangeline replied. "I've been ready since before I was born. Catherine bound me to this fate, but I choose it freely. Let them come." Below, the torches grew brighter as the hunters approached the gates of Blackthorn Manor. The final trial was beginning. The patriarch arrived at the gates of Blackthorn Manor as the dark moon rose, a moon so starved of light it seemed to devour the sky around it. He was ancient, older than Thaddeus by perhaps a century, his face etched with the peculiar weariness of those who have spent lifetimes fighting battles they believe are holy. With him came 7 other figures, each bearing implements of power, Staffs inscribed with prayers in languages that predated written history, vessels containing water blessed by saints long dead, and a single object that made even Evangeline's newly immortal senses recoil. A blade forged from the nail of St. Peter's cross, capable of piercing not just flesh, but the very bonds that held supernatural entities in existence. Sister Margot was not among them. Through their bond, Evangeline felt Thaddeus's moment of sorrow at that confirmation. The nun had been executed by her own order for her heresy of compassion. "We have come to sever the abomination," the patriarch declared, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to shake the manor's ancient stones. "By the authority vested in this tribunal, we will dissolve the binding that holds you together and cast each of you into the isolation your natures deserve." Evangeline and Thaddeus stood atop the manor's grand staircase, silhouetted against candlelight. Instead of resistance, they descended slowly, deliberately, meeting the tribunal in the entrance hall. That cathedral of marble and shadow, where everything had begun when Evangeline first arrived, seeking her inheritance. "We will not resist," Thaddeus said calmly. "We will not fight. We invite you to perform your ritual." The patriarch hesitated, clearly having expected defiance. But Evangeline understood Thaddeus's strategy. They could not win through force, but they might win through transformation. If they could demonstrate that severance was impossible, that the binding transcended the tribunal's ability to break it, then even the most rigid faith might fracture. The tribunal formed a circle around them, beginning to chant in that ancient language. Not Latin, but something older, words that seemed to vibrate in the space between sound and silence. The blessed water began to burn with white-hot intensity. The staffs crackled with sacred power, and the blade of St. Peter's cross was raised, ready to pierce through whatever bound them together. Evangeline felt the severance ritual beginning to work. It was exquisite agony, like being torn apart cell by cell, consciousness being split into fragments. She could feel Thaddeus being pulled away from her, their bond stretching like taffy across an infinite distance. But as the pain intensified, something unexpected occurred. The binding didn't break. Instead, it deepened. With each attempt the tribunal made to sever them, their connection grew stronger. It was as though the magic of the severance, designed to separate them, instead catalyzed a more fundamental integration. Evangeline felt Thaddeus's consciousness merging more completely with her own, and hers with his. They were not separating, they were becoming singular. The patriarch sensed it too. His voice faltered in the chant. "Impossible. The severance cannot fail. The sacred magic cannot." "It can fail," Evangeline said, and her voice now held only Thaddeus's tones, or perhaps only her own. There was no longer any distinction. "Because you are attempting to break something that cannot be broken by doctrine or dogma. You are attempting to sever love itself. And love, true love, is the only force in creation more ancient than your order's theology." She and Thaddeus stepped toward the center of the tribunal circle. Where they moved, the candlelight seemed to follow them, creating a halo of illumination that grew brighter with each step. "Catherine Ashford was correct," Thaddeus's voice continued through Evangeline's mouth, or perhaps they spoke in unison. The distinction had become meaningless. Redemption is not about denying what you are, it is about choosing how you will exist. For 300 years I existed as a monster because that is what I believed myself to be. But the moment I was truly seen by another person, the moment I was loved not despite my darkness but inclusive of it, I became something else entirely. The blade of St. Peter's cross began to glow, vibrating in the patriarch's hand as though attempting to escape his grip. The blessed water boiled in its vessels. The staffs crackled with increasingly unstable energy. "You cannot destroy what we have become," Evangeline and Thaddeus said together. because we are not a violation of natural law. We are the fulfillment of a law far older than your order's understanding. The law that says two souls, genuinely choosing each other, create something that transcends death, transcends immortality, transcends even the boundaries between light and dark. The patriarch made a final, desperate attempt. He raised the blade of St. Peter's cross and plunged it directly into the space between Evangeline and Thaddeus, attempting to sever them at the spiritual level where their binding was most intimate. The blade passed through them as though they were made of light rather than matter. And in that moment of passing, something extraordinary occurred. The severance ritual, meeting resistance it could not overcome, inverted. Instead of tearing them apart, it began to rebuild them, not as two separate entities, but as something entirely new. The magic that was meant to destroy them instead facilitated a transcendence beyond anything the tribunal could have imagined. Evangeline and Thaddeus began to transform. Their forms became luminescent, no longer constrained by the ordinary rules of physics or biology. They existed suddenly in multiple states simultaneously, solid and ethereal, alive and undead, mortal and immortal. They were the bride and bridegroom that Catherine Ashford had envisioned when she first bound her bloodline to the cursed vampire 300 years ago. They were the resolution of an impossible contradiction, and they were beautiful. The patriarch fell to his knees, and the tribunal's chanting faltered entirely. Even zealots, even those committed to the destruction of darkness, were not immune to witnessing something that transcended their understanding of what reality could contain. "Go," Evangeline and Thaddeus said together, their voice carrying gentleness rather than threat. "Tell your order what you have witnessed. Tell them that we are no longer what they hunt. We are something new, something that bridges the chasm between the sacred and the profane. We are proof that redemption is possible even for the most cursed." The patriarch rose slowly, his entire worldview clearly shattered. He gestured to the other tribunal members, and they gathered their implements of power, tools that had become useless in the face of something their doctrine could not classify or condemn. As they departed, the patriarch paused at the manor's entrance and turned back. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice stripped of all zealous certainty. "We will live," Evangeline replied simply. "Here, at Blackthorn, in the twilight existence between worlds, we will tend this manor and the magic that dwells within it. We will offer sanctuary to those caught between states, as we have been. And we will wait, knowing that perhaps someday humanity will understand that darkness and light, mortality and immortality, are not opposites, but partners in the eternal dance of existence." Thaddeus extended his hand, and Evangeline took it. Where their forms touched, they seemed to merge and separate simultaneously, existing in a state of quantum superposition, two beings and one being, individual and unified, forever bound and eternally free. The patriarch left without another word. Alone in Blackthorn Manor, in the light of the dark moon, Evangeline and Thaddeus stood together as they had at the beginning, but transformed utterly. They were no longer cursed and blessing, prisoner and liberator. They were covenant made manifest, redemption embodied, love transcendent. And somewhere in the depths of the manor, in a gallery where an ancient portrait hung, the paint began to change. The image of the sad-eyed man began to shift, transforming into something new, a portrait of two beings existing as one, beautiful and terrible and utterly impossibly real. They had not escaped their fate, they had transcended it. And in that transcendence, they had become something the world had never seen before, proof that even the most impossible love could reshape reality itself. The dark moon waned, and Evangeline and Thaddeus, bound by blood and choice, and the covenant of their becoming, walked together into the eternal twilight of Blackthorn Manor, no longer cursed, No longer imprisoned. Finally, irrevocably, home.